Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is our second TMACOG Tech of the year. It is a two-part series, so we're very excited about the upcoming topics over the next 2 days. We've been doing TMACOG Techs here for over a decade, and we are very excited to provide another educational and training opportunity for our wonderful members and guests. We have a lot of new faces on this webinar, so thank you so much for joining us today. A little bit of background on me, if you don't know who I am. My name is Rosanna Helsley. I'm the Director of Membership and Outreach here at TMACOG. I get to work with some really wonderful people, so I'm just going to shout out Jody, who's helping do a lot of the tech today, and some other people that are on the call as well. So thank you so very much to my colleagues here at TMACOG. I've been at TMACOG just shy of a year, and this TMACOG Tech series is one of the things that I've been very excited to work on, trying to make that a little bit more robust, a more robust offering for our members and for our guests. I've been working in local government for over 14 years, so I've been trying to choose topics that I think would be topical and practical for our members and our community partners. So we strive to bring these resources to our region here at TMACOG. And the topic of electric vehicles we thought would be very prudent. It's ever evolving, and we're going to kind of look at it from two different lenses. So today we're going to take a step back, and when Van will introduce himself, but he's going to touch upon kind of the nuts and bolts of electric vehicle charging stations and electric vehicle charging in and of itself. Some of this might be new to you, and some of you may know a little bit about it, but we felt that it was important for everyone to be on the same page as we go into it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the codes and the ordinances or other kind of requirements when it comes to electric vehicle charging stations that your community may want to look at. So that's today. And then tomorrow's session is focused on the financial aspect of electric vehicle charging stations. So if you haven't registered for that one, please do. And Jody will put that stuff into the chat here later in the session. There's still time to register for tomorrow. So there's going to be some good topics on the grant funding and other opportunities to fund bringing electric vehicle charging stations to your community. So a few housekeeping rules. We'd like to be conscious of everyone's time. Like I said at the beginning of this, we'll try to keep it to 60 minutes. We know that your time is valuable and you'll get back to your communities or your organizations. Cameras and mics will be off, so we highly encourage, if you have questions, to type them into the chat, and we will do questions at the end to try to streamline the process and get through the nuts and bolts of the presentation. And if there are still questions and we're getting close to that 60 minutes, then we'll try to take all of those, answer them, and send those out at the end after the session. Please look out if after the session for an email that will have resources and evaluation as well. So this is being recorded, as I indicated, but we also have some resources that we will share. We are going to start the presentation with a quick video, hoping the audio will work. Sandy Spang, our president here at TMACOG, was not able to join us, but she wanted to send a quick welcome, and then we'll get right into it with Van. So hopefully this works.
Good morning. I'm Sandy Spang with TMACOG. Welcome to this very timely TMACOG Tech. Electric vehicles are coming, and with them, EV charging stations, both publicly and privately funded. As we saw when cellular infrastructure entered our communities, it's so important to be prepared with zoning and design standards. I've heard that EV charging station design can be as simple as sort of a upside down garbage can with two hoses coming out. How will that look on your main street? Today, you will receive resources that will prepare your community for the future of electric vehicle technology. I hope you enjoy the session.
Okay, well, I heard it on my end, so I hope everyone else did. If not, we'll make sure that you get that. But I'm going to turn over the presentation to a wonderful partner of ours at Manic Smith Group. Van will introduce himself and go straight into his presentation. Thanks for being here, Van.
Hi, folks, and thanks, Rosanna. My name is Van Deffabaugh. I'm with the Manic Smith Group. I'm a senior associate and senior project manager. I have been working in the energy market for pretty much most of my career. So I have the pleasure of working with you all and more or less presenting EV Charging 101. So diving right into the charging equipment overview. Wanted to give everybody, kind of get everybody up to speed at the same time. There's three types of charging equipment. There's the level 1 charging, level 2 charging, and the level 3, which is also called the direct current fast charging. Kind of give you guys a little bit of an understanding of what a 1 hour of charging is for each of these chargers. A level 1 charger, typically in 1 hour, you can get about 5 miles of range. For a level 2 charger, which you can see at homes and you do see all in most communities, in 1 hour, you can typically get somewhere in the range of about 30 miles. Once you get to the direct current fast charging, that range can can be anywhere between 150 to 210 miles. I mean, a lot of it depends on what that charging, what that model is of the vehicle, what amps it can pull in, and also what that charging station can also deliver. There's a lot of communication that happens with the level 3 charger, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So getting into the level 1 charging equipment, that's pretty much what you see at your home. You'll see that at people's homes. It takes 110 or 120 volt power. It's the charging port that you'll typically see is the J1772. It's best suited for overnight charging and at-home charging. As a quick fact, a standard wall outlet is 110 to 120 volts, and it usually takes about 11 to 20 hours to fully charge an all-electric vehicle. And just so you guys are aware, my father recently purchased a EV Bolt, a Chevy Bolt, and we did test this out. I think the first charger he ended up getting was the level 1 charger, and it literally did take him about from going from no charge all the way up to a full charge. It was about 12 to 13 hours. So a lot of it depends on the battery. It depends on really the vehicle and what that amperage is. For his amperage, it's somewhere in the range of about 38 amps. But the power output is approximately 3 kilowatts for a level 1 charger. Level 2 charging equipment. This is probably more important to really focus on. She uses the same type of charger port that the level 1 charger, or excuse, a very similar charging port that the level 1 charger uses as well. However, now you're at 140. You can also use, or excuse me, 240 or 208 volt. So in commercial, you'll see 208 volt used a lot for lighting, parking lot lighting and such. So it's easy to kind of pull that into that infrastructure and add that level 2 charging capabilities. Again, the charging time is about 10 to 20 miles of range for 1 hour of charging. With that 220, you're typically best suited for workplace environments or retail government offices, airports, or at-home charging. So most public charging stations are going to be level 2. They need to be NEMA rated. They need to be NEMA rated RV plugs as well. So there are some circumstances for those of you who do RVing, you'll see these types of plugs out in the RV stations. So I've seen many people who go out with their RVs and they have an electric vehicle with them, and they'll actually go ahead and plug right in because they actually have their level 2 charging equipment with them. One thing that should be noted about a level 2 charging charger is it typically is the power consumption of a electric dryer. So a lot of times people want to understand, well, what kind of power is really coming out of it. I mean, it's a little bit less than electric stove. Electric stove usually is going to be a lot more robust. But yeah, it's about 7.2 kilowatts in the commercial or in the residential field. But in commercial, you can get 19.2 kilowatts of delivery. So the DC fast charging equipment, this is really where we're wanting to go with getting that into our infrastructure. When we're really talking about the corridors and trying to get people to buy into using charging equipment, this is where transit folks really need to see this type of infrastructure. It's best suited to have these level 3 chargers along highways and in downtown showcases. You've got 3 different types of charging ports. You've got the CCS, you've got the CHAdeMO charge port, and you also have the NACS, which is also called the Tesla charging port. There are converters. Most people that have these types of vehicles will have a converter to go from one type of port to the other. The great thing about the level 3 charging equipment, even the level 2, is there's a lot of communication happening between the vehicle and the charging equipment. So you're never going to pull up to a charging station where you're going to be delivering too much amperage or too much current into that vehicle. There's a lot of communication happening. That vehicle is telling that charging station, I can only accept this much power. And that's usually the limiting factors, because safety now has really gotten a lot better in the EV markets as well. You don't hear stories about, batteries overheating when they're being charged now. So there's a lot more going on in the computer systems today. The outlets for a DC fast charger can be 208 all the way up to 480 volt. 480 volt is typically what you're going to see. It's going to be a three-phase. It's going to be a three-phase power connection. Unfortunately, for that type of infrastructure, you're going to spend a lot more money. You're going to need a separate transformer typically, unless you already have 480 volt three-phase power to the site. So a lot of times when you see these these DC fast chargers, you're going to see a pad mount transformer somewhere close nearby if they don't already have one for that for a local building or whatever else may be in that area. The great thing about DC fast charging is your charge times, can be, 60 to 80 minutes, 60 to 80 miles, and you can get that in 20 minutes. So, I mean, that's not as good as, gasoline yet, but it's getting to the point now where you can go on a trip, you can go and, maybe have dinner or something like that, and now you can actually get a lot more charge and you can get a lot more mileage just to get you from point A to point B along the road. So some of the other quick facts that we were going to talk about, getting into the DC fast chargers is, most vehicles use the CCS connector. So, a lot of people don't realize that, but that's what's great about this type of infrastructure is that's really what you're starting to see out there in the municipal communities. Tesla obviously has their own plugin, but they are quickly, trying to figure out, hey, how do we marry all this together and kind of be a little bit more friendly with each other. So depending on the size and specifications of the battery, DC fast chargers can charge EVs up to 80% in as few as 20 to 30 minutes. A lot of people ask the question, why is it only 80%? It's because that last 20%, typically with a battery, you want to slow that charge down. You'll find that there's a lot of, when that current's coming in, it's going to heat the battery up. So the issue is you want to keep that temperature down, and you want to regulate how much current's coming in for that last 20%. That's why you see the big slowdown. That's why we're trying to be more careful about batteries overheating, batteries potentially blowing up, any of that kind of stuff. And I apologize for using that type of term, but that is what was happening back in the 80s and the 90s. Each hour adds about 100 miles of driving range, so that's pretty good as well. So, and again, when we were talking about the three-phase 40 volt transformer, a lot of times that typical cost is going to be about $50,000. So you have to include that in your infrastructure costs when you go to the DC fast charger. So what are the required infrastructure for public EV chargers? You need to start looking at what your site selection is, your planning and design, the EV charge equipment. Do you want to go with a level 1, a 2, or a 3? What is your power source there, locally? Obviously level 1, that's easy, as long as you have power nearby. Level 2 is usually a little easy as well. If you already have lighting and a few other infrastructure items in that parking lot, level 2 becomes that easy button as well. Again, level 3 or DC fast charging, it does take more infrastructure. You could potentially have that 480 volt transformer, but you need to make sure that that's being included in your cost. Network requirements, you can go wire or wireless. Or cellular service. It does require a network connection. There needs to be communication between the vehicle and the charging station. And for payment purposes, there needs to be communication with whoever that provider is, that management software provider. So again, number 5 is the EV charging management software. And this is the software that performs the processes, the payment, monitors the charging stations, and manages the energy usage and bill management. Another thing that a lot of people forget is maintenance and operation. You should develop a plan for maintenance and operations for these EV chargers. I don't know about most of you folks, but I've traveled around and I've seen a couple, charging stations that it just appears that nobody's doing any maintenance on them. They put it in, maybe they checked the box and then they just moved on. So a lot of that can be bought when you buy the device and when you buy that charger. Those types of O&M agreements can be solidified at that time when you're actually even doing the management software as well. So something to look into. So strategy for EV charger deployment. Your site location. This is going a little bit deeper into it. Okay. Level 1 chargers are best suited for residentials. Okay. You can put them in. I've seen people put them in schools, and they're basically not monitoring them. They're doing it for free. Level 2 chargers should be installed where vehicles dwell times are a half hour to 8 hours, because that's that typical charge time. So people going to work, or people maybe even going to a restaurant, maybe not gas stations as much. I mean, people do those, but a lot of times you're not at a gas station for that long. When you get into the DC fast chargers, that's when you're at that half hour mark or less. And whether you're along the turnpike or whether you're at a gas station or other public area where it seems to make sense, where people only need to just get that little bit of a bump to get that extra 80 miles, that's where you really should be looking at those types of charging systems. And again, you got to remember the cost. EV charging equipment and installation costs. So level 1, typically you're looking at $300 to $800. Not too bad. Level 2, $5,000 to $35,000. A lot of it just depends on the location and it depends on the infrastructure that's there. So that's the range on these costs. Level 3, 40 to 150,000. Even on the low end where it's at 40,000, that's usually where you've already got 480 volt 3-phase power. You're basically buying the equipment, you're just putting in the duct bank, you're extending all of those utilities to it, the network, and you're extending the power to the actual charging station. Still, you're paying quite a bit of money just for the equipment alone and for the management system. So the hardware considerations, mounting, it can be pedestal or wall. I've seen some great wall-mounted level 2 chargers in parking decks. I think over at the library as well. They're fascinating. I think it's great because now you don't have to worry about the bollards and everything else to protect those chargers from the vehicles, because that's always been my biggest concern, is a vehicle just whacking it, and it going over the curb, or a snow plow, which is even worse. Cable management strategy, coil or retractable, except, a lot of times these older charging stations, you'll see them in the schools where it looks like somebody just has their old SO cord out there, and people do a good job wrapping it up. It's almost like going in the old days of getting air in your tire, and some people, they don't manage that, they don't manage the air hose very well, and they just lay it on the ground and walk away. The level 2s and the level 1s, they actually have systems in place where you actually have to put it back into the hanger. So it's managed quite a bit better. And I think there may be some level 1s out there that actually have that ability as well. The number of charge ports and types. So you can actually there actually are charging systems that'll actually have 4 charging ports. But you really have to have the right situation for that. I've seen where they may have cars parking on opposite sides, and there may be a charging station in the center, so you can get 4 people, 4 different vehicles at one time. You can do that. Again, it's the infrastructure that you're bringing to it, and the amount and the size of the wire that's going to really dictate whether or not you can do that. Theft systems. There are theft systems available to prevent vandalism. At the end of the day, really, you need a camera. You really should probably have some type of maybe a passive camera so you can at least see what's going on out there. And a lot of times you can even work with whoever that network provider is or that software provider. That way they can at least understand and troubleshoot some of the issues that they could be having at the charging stations. And operating conditions, temperature, humidity, operating limits. So some of the things that we're learning a lot more about EV charging infrastructure is in Michigan and Ohio and in the Midwest, when you're dealing with the cold conditions, how do you manage around that area? So, I mean, at a gas station, for instance, they keep everything covered and it's clean, whereas a lot of these charging stations in the municipalities, it's out there in the elements. So something to consider. I mean, who's actually shoveling the walks? Who's actually keeping it clear and clean? And then network availability. Obviously, with wireless systems today, you can do quite well, but it is preferred typically to have a wired network system. Software considerations, your payment system, payment methods, fee structure, network maintenance fees, all of that I think I'd mentioned before. Those are items that you really should consider as well. So I'm probably hitting everything again. I'm kind of reiterating it, but I'm just trying to drive it home again. Really, where do we want to see these types of charging stations? And really, when you start looking at that pyramid, that's really where it's helpful. Where you see the green, and the green is really going to be, in my opinion, that's really your level ones and level twos. That's where it's going to be most cost effective. When you start getting into the orange, that's really going to be your level twos where it's going to be very effective. And then when you're into the blue area, that's your interstate travel, that's shopping, recreation. Level threes make most sense there, but maybe the cost may be insurmountable. So you may want to go with a level two charging station in those locations as well, especially in the entertainment, shopping, recreation areas. So again, for future development, wanted to at least just kind of show you, just kind of a layout of what we should be thinking about for even level three or DC superfast chargers that are 500 kilowatt to 750 kilowatt. This is really where we need to be. This is the equivalent to going to a gas station. And we really need to be focusing on how we're going to build this infrastructure into our municipalities and rural communities as well.
That's awesome, Van. Thank you so very much. I think that you provided us a lot of great detail. So if you have any questions about things that Van talked about, start typing them into the chat. Jody will compile those and we'll reference those at the end. But I'm going to take the reins now and let Van have a little bit of a rest. And I'm going to talk a little bit about community readiness for electric vehicle charging stations. So I want to be upfront. We had started working with our friends at the Toledo-Lucas County Plan Commissions to have somebody from their organization speak. So a lot of this information that is in this presentation was taken from their study and approach for land use planning and electric vehicle charging. So we appreciate their help on getting this. And then I took a little bit more of a more detailed approach and used my experience as a former administrator from a municipality and put things in here that we think your community should be thinking about. We hope that you are already thinking about it, but the goal at the end of this is to provide you with some thoughts and get things in the works for you to maybe look at your codes or look at your zoning or accessibility and things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So Toledo-Lucas County Plan Commission, what they did was they did a study and they looked at their existing policies. So what do they have currently on the books? And I think this is really important for any communities to really take a step back and say, okay, what are our current policies and how do they relate to electric vehicle charging stations? So a lot of the things that Van talked about, do you have anything in your policies that maybe need to be updated or need to be changed? The words need to be changed. You need to get your legal counsel involved when you're talking about some of these different languages that might need to be changed. So they looked at their existing existing policies. And then they also looked at peer city policies, and I'll touch a little bit about that in a minute. What are other communities doing? It's always great. As a former administrator, it's always nice to see what other communities are doing. It may not be a boilerplate that could work for you, but maybe it makes you think about things in a different way. So it's always nice to look at some other communities, maybe similar sizes, maybe larger, smaller, just to see what's happening out there. And then it's also important to identify what your needs are. So our friends at Toledo Lucas County Plan Commission, they were identifying the needs of this area, what this region needs, and then you need to integrate it into your existing regulations. So that's essentially what their study was. That's a very, very quick synopsis. I don't want to try to diminish by any means. So they did a lot of great work, and we'll be able to provide some more details from their process when we send out the follow-up email. So as I said, they were able to look at peer city policies, and I just did a quick snapshot of some of them. So some of our friends in and around Ohio, for example, City of Cleveland defines electric vehicle charging as motor vehicle maintenance. They have no specific regulations. City of Columbus, off-street parking spaces dedicated to EV charging count towards parking minimums, but not towards the maximums. Currently, the city of Cincinnati has no zoning regulations regarding EV. Neither does the city of Akron. So it's important to see what other communities are doing and keep up with it, just so that maybe it would be nice to collaborate and see what maybe would work in your community. So what would work in your community? So what we would like to provide here at TMACOG are like the basic planning tools to start thinking about for your community. And not everything is going to work for a large community, and not everything is going to work for a small community. So what the intent is here today is just to get your mind thinking of some of the topics that you may want to have conversations with your elected officials, with your appointed officials, bringing in different departments on how this would affect. Like Van said, the maintenance is a big thing. Who's going to shovel around them, or who's going to plow the lot near it? Those are all very important things, and that all does cost money. So these are things that we hope that you take to heart and start talking about in your community if you haven't already. So from a zoning perspective, zoning is a great planning tool. It's a great planning tool to allow electric vehicle charging stations, but it's also something that you could use to prevent electric vehicle charging stations to go in certain areas of your community. Maybe you want to think about specific areas that you would like to see them, and definitely areas that there's no way that you would ever want to see something like that in that street or that neighborhood or things of that nature. That's all going to be contingent on your community's desire. But zoning is what needs to be looked at so that you can have something in your ordinances, in your codes to really identify what you want and what you don't want. The other thing that needs to be considered with zoning is the potential to address what is going to happen in the future. And this is easier said than done, because none of us really know what's going to happen. I've been zoning was one of my first jobs in local government, and that was over 14 years ago. And EV charging stations was not on the table when I started doing that. So we all have to be proactive, and that's, like I said, a little bit more difficult, but maybe creating a review process. So do you review your zoning every year to see if any new technology has come up or things that you may want to change? What we like to offer is, we wouldn't want to see zoning go in the books and then you don't look at it again for 10, 15 years, and then all of this technology has advanced and you're kind of behind the curve on that. So it's an important step towards being ready, but we definitely know that there's things that need to be considered for the future. So the next thing is parking. Many communities, if not all communities, have some kind of a code relative to parking requirements. So parking ordinances, you may have certain number of parking requirements when a new development comes into your community. Maybe you have parking requirements for an apartment complex, multi-family, residential. So what does that look like in your current regulations? Do you have certain amount of parking restrictions that you may have to update? So again, I also recommend getting your legal counsel involved and making sure that you have everything from the legal perspective, ensuring that you have the correct language. You also have to include your community, but also maybe your plan commissions or any of the other public engagement that you would take into consideration for your respective community when it comes to where would your community like to see this kind of parking. The other thing that you need to take into consideration with parking that we would recommend is on-street EV charging. What does this look like in your community? If you have older parts of town, does this look different when you have a lot of street parking compared to maybe other parts of town that have sprawled out and you have more parking lots? So a lot of things to consider with the parking regulations. You want to look at the language, and again, looking at different cities of different sizes would be a great opportunity. And we're going to try to provide you with resources again in the follow-up email that might help you with that. Okay, so codes. So when I say codes here, we're talking more about building codes and electric codes. So not necessarily your zoning code or your ordinances, but this is electric and building codes. So obviously Ohio has a residential and a commercial building code. We have an electric code. You have to make sure that the communities or the developers that are coming into your respective area understand that there's code regulations that they're going to have to follow as well. So I would highly stress looking at those different codes and making sure that your internal staff is aware of what they may need to know when a developer comes into your community and potentially wants to do this, or if you decide as a community yourself that you would like to install this, what are the requirements? Because then there are also costs associated with that as well. And then you have the permitting. So the main thing would probably be the electric permitting that would come into play when you're potentially installing a electric vehicle charging station. So who does the local enforcement for the permitting? So for example, most electric work in homes and businesses would require a permit and generally must be performed by a licensed electrician. That doesn't happen in every community. Not every community maybe enforces that. So just taking into consideration what your jurisdiction or your community does or doesn't do. But this may be something that if you don't do it, that you may want to think about it because there's a lot of things potentially coming down the pike with that. Okay, so all of this is intertwined with some of the next topics that we'll talk about. So these are some local considerations that we'd like to offer you from our perspective on things that are related to electric vehicle charging stations. So one of the main things would be accessibility. So in your zoning code, you may or may not, I hope you do, have ADA compliant parking restrictions. The U.S. Access Board has developed a technical assistant document to help with communities to design and construct EV charging stations that are accessible and are able to be used by people with disabilities. So we will send a link to this so that in the follow-up email, so you have that. But accessibility is a huge topic to consider on when you're thinking of a location or when you're thinking about designing. So Van talked about wall mounted, pole mounted, the bollards, all those kinds of things. Those are things to take into consideration when you're trying to design and locate where these charging stations would go. Signage, one of my favorite things. I love signs, if you know me. Signage is very important, and there's two things to think about with signage. We're not just talking about signage on where the EV charging stations are located, but we're also talking about signage, wayfinding signs to get people to come to your community. This is a huge potential for economic development in your community. If you're located in an area where people are traveling through and you have these charging stations, people are going to stop, charge their vehicle, and potentially frequent your coffee shop or your restaurant or a retail shop or whatever the case may be. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about signage in and around your community. So not just signs in the actual parking stall, let's say, but maybe you have signs at the entrance to your community, and what that looks like is up to you. And maybe you have design standards on wayfinding signs. So we would highly suggest looking at not just the signage on where EV charging stations are located, where EVs can park, but also wayfinding signs so that people can identify and locate where they can go for that. And I would be remiss if I didn't reference one of my favorite documents. It's so large, the Federal Highway Administration's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which includes design standards for charging stations in its latest version. So it's available online if you haven't. I hope a lot of our municipalities and townships that are on the call have referenced that, because I have referenced it many times, and it's definitely really good to understand what those regulations are. The Alternative Fuels Data Center, which is another link that we'll send you, also has a really good plethora of information when it comes to signage for your local community to take into consideration. The next topic is equity. So many of you might think, well, why are we talking about equity when it comes to electric vehicle charging stations? Well, when we're talking about, we should always be thinking about equity when it comes to design. It's an important topic. And really, we're talking about affordability, accessibility, reliability, location, safety, and maybe some other economic opportunities. So are you putting these charging stations in a place where it's easily accessible, not necessarily from a disability standpoint, but from other individuals who may come from maybe a lower income background? Are you only putting them in certain places that other individuals would be able to access? So thinking of equity, what does that mean for your community? That's going to be a different answer for every community. So we highly suggest that you take that into consideration when you're looking at design and any kind of regulations you'd like to put on the books. And then lastly, I think the big thing that many communities are taking into consideration is, what is this going to cost? As Van said, the costs vary depending on if you're looking at level 1 all the way to DC. It also is going to be costly if you're in a location where you're going to maybe have to run more power to it because there's no power currently there. So taking into consideration all of the costs, not necessarily just the cost of the equipment. So the equipment is there, it costs XYZ, but what's the labor to run the power? Do you have to do a trench like this picture shows? What's it going to cost to repair that the trench? The installation costs are going to vary. You need to think about the infrastructure, the site location, the existing and maybe future wiring or electric upgrades for that. We always want to stress when it comes to planning and design. Obviously, you want to look at what you want to do immediately, but what happens if you decide in the next 5 to 10 years you would like to expand upon that? Take that into consideration when you're looking at doing your electric wiring or the trenching, and can you put things that are going to be there for future development? A lot of this may seem like and not novel topics, but we really want to stress that it is a very comprehensive review when you're talking about it. I would venture to say that many communities would like to see EV charging stations come to their jurisdiction, but there's a lot of things to take into consideration, and cost is one of them. So that's why tomorrow, the next session, is going to touch upon funding mechanisms on which may help cover the cost of certain aspects of bringing EV charging stations to your community. We have a really great group of individuals that are slated to speak, so I'm very, very excited for that. So with that, I thank you for your time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we are going to take any questions. Hopefully you started to send them in. If you haven't, I will give a couple minutes to see if there's any specific questions relative to what Van talked about on the background of EV charging stations, what to know about different levels, and then anything that I reference when it talks about what communities should be thinking about relative to regulations, codes, permitting, and local considerations for accessibility, signage, things of that nature. So. All right, Van, I think we have a question. I'm going to get that up. What is the useful life of each level, assuming they are maintained according to manufacturer standards? So that's a question for Van.
Boy, that's a great question. I think I can see the barrel staring at me on that one. That's a great question, but I think with most electrical devices, I think your level, believe it or not, your level 1 charging stations, I think do have if you've seen one, they typically have like a manufacturer's, um, um, you know, um, guarantee on them, and they'll last up to about 10 years before they start saying, hey, you need to probably get something else. Level twos and level threes, that's a harder one to answer, because I think at the end of the day, that type of infrastructure, they're looking at 10 to 15 years before you need to do any type of major maintenance on them. But I think we're probably going to see that happening. We're probably going to see more of that in the next 5 to 10 years as well. I've actually seen some charging stations that have been out there for about 15 years and they're still working fine. I can't tell you how much power they're delivering because I think at the end of the day, that's proprietary equipment. And a lot of times they may not necessarily share that with you. But with all devices, we can understand that charging does kind of degrade over time.
Great. Thank you. One of the questions, are the PowerPoint slides from today's presentation available? Yes, they will be available when we send out a follow-up email. We'll send the PowerPoint as well as any other links that we felt would be beneficial for the attendees to have. And then the recording will also be available on our website, but that may take a little bit of time. It won't be immediate right after this presentation. Another one of the questions, have towns looked into working with developers to get charging installed at a reduced cost? I have heard there's different models of bringing in your charging station. So you have the developer coming in. There's also communities that have looked at a public-private partnership to bring EV charging stations in. So there are
So
examples out there.
There are
Yes.
incentives out there as well. So depending on where the municipality is, so as an example, a few years ago, before the Biden administration was setting up additional funds available, there was the Volkswagen settlement about the
Mm.
diesel something. They were playing games with their diesel vehicles, so there's a big pot of money out there that all states have access to. And when you work with your energy provider, whether it's First Energy or whoever, a lot of times what will end up happening, it's a one third, one third, one third sharing, where the developer pays for one third of the cost. That money from the government, the settlement is a third, and then the energy partner would be that other third. That does not include typically the maintenance fees, anything after construction is completed. But there actually are other incentives out there as well, which are maybe more lucrative with the Biden administration. But a lot of it depends on where you're building, depends on the location. If you're putting it in an area where it's more disadvantaged, there's a lot more money if it's within a certain corridor. So that I think is another topic you guys are going to talk about later. And
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully I won't
Yeah.
be involved with that because I talk too much. So I apologize.
No,
Sorry.
it's good, man. This is why we're happy to do something like this. It's good to get just this information out there. So, this is a great question. Is there a way to dress up a level 3 charger in a historic area of town? So this I'm gathering, this is not what it was said, but I'm gathering maybe you have design standards for certain areas of your town, specifically the historic downtown, let's say. How would you, if you could, dress it up?
Well, I think that's more of a question for a landscape architect than
Yeah.
it is for me. However, I will say this. In working in communities and when you're doing wayfinding signage or anything like that, even in a historical district, a lot of times you'll work with the whoever is kind of overseeing that historic district, whoever is the managers of that, and you can usually find some type of an enclosure, a modified enclosure. And there's a lot of these companies that will work with you on modified enclosures that make it look a little bit more historical, if you will. But
Hmm.
honestly, it's kind of like making it look like an old gas pump, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
can, from like the 20s or from early 2000s or so. I mean, it just depends what you're looking for. If Disney can do it, we can do it.
That's good. I like that. And then a follow-up question. I'm gathering, what about charging at apartment complexes? So those would be more residential, but multi-family. So there would be a lot more there. Van, have you seen a lot of those?
So I have not seen a lot of like existing apartments. I haven't seen a lot of owners or landlords, if you will, putting those in. A lot of times because they kind of look at it as a headache. A lot of times, what can happen, I've seen communities put this together, is anytime they're doing any future work, they'll actually make that a requirement for any future building that's happening at those sites. And it's easy enough to provide infrastructure for a level one charger. That's simple. I mean, honestly, all you're looking for is a NEMA 12 110 plug. That's to me, that's low hanging fruit for folks. When you start getting into the level two chargers, I'm not so happy
Mm,
about putting 220-volt out there, for people to be plugging into, and you could get some type of an arc pulling out of it. It's just it's kind of a scarier situation. But I think apartments really should be looking at having some type of a plug out there for their residences.
mm, okay.
110
Uh,
volt.
well, yeah.
Sorry, clarify that.
Okay.
110 volt.
All right, here's a great question. Have either of us heard of any communities working with a local energy provider to upgrade local substations to prepare for EV charging stations before a developer approaches them? Or is this something that most municipalities implement the three-legged stool financing technique when they have a developer to install? So
So
go
they
ahead.
answered their they just
Yeah,
answered their question at the
yeah,
end. So it would be great to say that people are that energy companies and transmission companies are putting in all that necessary infrastructure, but it's no different than any development. Unless you have a savvy developer that's basically building a community and they say, I am going to put so many fast chargers and so many level two chargers, and they put in the right electrical infrastructure from the beginning. You're going back and adding all that infrastructure and getting the transmission lines in. I mean, a lot of it is you build it and they will come. That's kind of the
yeah.
situation, even with power, right?
Yeah, field of dreams for sure. Um, this is a great question. As a next one is, as a former municipal administrator, do municipalities need to carry separate insurance against anything that might happen on an from an EV charging station that may malfunction? So let's clarify that this would be on a public land, so land that the municipality, so like at a park or a municipal lot. This would not be something at a Target or a Meijer or something like that. This would be on a municipal lot. I know what my answer would be, Van. What do you want to take? Okay.
I'm hoping your
So
answer is yes.
yeah. Well, so yes, this would be so for those who have never gone through a property and casualty insurance renewal, I will tell you that you should be talking to your broker and you should be talking about your schedule and you should be talking about what you own as a municipality. And my recommendation would be to specifically point these out on the schedule individually as opposed to an aggregate. My recommendation would be to take that inventory. What is that? So what is the cost? So you also have to take that into consideration and take that information because your broker will want to know that. And when they look at what the level of insuring it is, but my recommendation would be to look at it individually and not bulk that into your general schedule. I know we have some finance directors on the call, and that may be if anybody wants to chime in, if they already have this in their municipality, that would be great. But I would definitely recommend the next time you talk to your property and casualty broker, this should be high priority.
Well, I'd be curious to see how the manufacturer of the charging equipment, how they're kind of pulled into that liability as well,
Yeah.
because obviously there's a lot of things that can happen, in a public venue, and still, I mean, somebody manufactured the charging equipment, right?
Hmm.
And now it's somebody else's responsibility to maintain and to
Hmm.
make sure it's being used properly. So that's
Yeah,
that's really how
absolutely.
all the roles need to be defined.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big proponent of making sure any kind of those agreements are clear, have your legal counsel look at them. You want to make sure that you've covered who's in who oversees what. So we are almost out of time, but we have about 8 minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions? I think we've answered all of them that have come through the chat. So thank you, Jody, for doing that. I'll give it another minute, but while we're waiting for any last minute questions, I just want to say again, thanks to Van. Okay, here's another one coming in.
Yes, yes. You
Yeah.
would definitely charge a fee as well. So again, Heather and Kathy, I believe, yeah, you would set up your cost structure to basically account for the power and the delivery and also your O&M costs, depreciation of the asset, if you will. You definitely want to recover all of those costs. And most charging stations, they'll have an initial fee that you pay right before you even get any energy out of it. So it's best once you're ready to start putting some infrastructure in to kind of have those conversations with some other municipalities and consultants.
And consultants for sure. And that's another cost to take into consideration.
Yep.
I really am a huge proponent of capital improvement planning, and this is the next wave. If communities haven't done that, you need to look at capital improvement planning. Capital improvement planning, this is just me from my previous experience, is not just 3 to 5 years. It is the O&M. O&M is huge, and that may involve, I became obsessed with landscape architects to Van's point. I mean, I would have loved to have been able to utilize them on every single project because it's a huge aspect. But thinking about what does that actually cost when you're moving forward over your capital improvement planning process. So here's another question. If we require that EV developers install charging stations according to the FAWA, Federal Highway Administration standards, do you anticipate that would better position a municipality for federal or state funding for future expansion? That's a great question. If we require the EV developers install, do you anticipate that would be better position a municipality for federal or state funding? That I think is a good question for tomorrow, because I honestly think
Yep.
that might be one of the topic, or it will be as part of it. So if I don't know who sent that question right now, but whoever did, if
Adam
you're not,
Pennis.
yes, Adam, if you're not, hi, Adam. If you're not
Pennis.
in the next session, please keep that question, because I think one of our speakers is going to touch upon some of
Great
this,
question.
basically what you're trying to get at. So good thinking ahead. You're welcome, Matt. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up now. Again, thank you so very much to Van. Thank you to everyone who participated. I really hope that you got a lot out of this presentation. You will receive it, like I said, after the fact. It may take a couple days, but we'll get you all of that information. You'll have our contact information. But we are just so grateful that you took time out of your day. Thank you to my TMACOG colleagues who helped with this. And I really, really appreciate your time. So enjoy the rest of your day. Northwest Ohio is a beautiful, almost fall day. And if you haven't registered for tomorrow, please do. You still have the availability to do that. And we hope to see you then. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.